I stood still in front of the reception desk, my heart pounding in my chest as if it wanted to escape. Under the warm golden light of the Wyndham Hotel's grand ballroom in Chicago, neatly arranged name tags with gold-trimmed edges and bold capital letters lay in perfect rows. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked one up. Ashley, the disappointment of the family. I blinked. Once, then again, as if my eyes were trying to erase the words in front of me. But no, they remained, brazen and cold, just like the stares I had endured for over a decade. No one stood nearby. No apologies, no explanations. Just laughter ringing out from the bar inside, where I knew exactly who was laughing the loudest. A laugh I could never forget because, throughout my teenage years, it had always accompanied sharp, veiled remarks. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Evelyn, my father's second wife. The woman who was always impeccably made up, with voluminous blonde hair and a saccharine smile that sent chills down my spine. She had perfected the art of making me feel small, out of place in the very home I once called my own. I tightened my grip on the name tag, feeling the hard plastic press against my palm. A part of me wanted to throw it to the ground, stomp on it, and walk away. But I knew Evelyn was watching me, waiting for me to react, to lash out, to cause a scene, so she could smirk and say, "See? She never grew up." I took a deep breath. Then, with deliberate calm, I set the name tag back on the table as if it meant nothing. But the truth was, I had just set down the last drop of patience I had left for this family. My father's 60th birthday party, Walter Simmons' grand celebration, was being held in the largest ballroom of the hotel, dripping with extravagance. Crystal chandeliers cast dazzling reflections over white cloth tables adorned with elegant candelabras and tall-stemmed red roses in glass vases. Everything exuded opulence, as if the event wasn't meant for loved ones but for the elite to congratulate themselves. I stepped into the ballroom, feeling the cold not from the air conditioning but from the sheer invisibility I carried with me. No one turned to greet me. No one called my name. I was a stranger in a sea of glittering guests, shaking hands, clinking glasses, exchanging pleasantries, without sparing me a single glance. I scanned the room, searching for my father, and then I saw him, standing at the center like a statesman. He beamed as he listened to Julian, Evelyn's son, boast about his new job at a top financial firm in New York. Beside him stood Camilla, Evelyn's youngest daughter, gleefully waving her hand to show off an engagement ring to the surrounding guests. My father lifted his head, his gaze passing over me for less than a second, but that was all it took for me to understand he hadn't been expecting me. He hadn't wanted me here. A quiet chuckle escaped my lips, bitter like unsweetened lemonade. What had I been hoping for? A hug? A simple, "Ashley, I'm glad you came, how foolish of me." I veered left toward the drinks table. Grasping a glass of mocktail, I steadied my hands, refusing to let them shake. I didn't want them to see me as weak. I didn't want them to know they had won again. "Oh, Ashley, is that you?" Evelyn's voice cooed beside me, smooth as velvet yet lined with thorns. I turned. She wore an emerald green evening gown, a classic pearl necklace, and bold red lipstick. Her smile was flawless, so perfect, it was eerie. "It's been a while," I replied, my voice light but firm. She tilted her head, her gaze sweeping over me. "What a surprise that you made it. With the freelance work you do, I suppose your schedule is quite flexible." I knew what she meant. No fancy title, no fixed salary, nothing that met the Simmons family's standards. I hadn't even responded when Evelyn lightly patted my shoulder and leaned in, her voice a mere whisper. "By the way, that name tag was adorable. Someone prepared it just for you." I followed her gaze and immediately understood what she was referring to. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even shocked. I felt only one thing, finality. Because today I would no longer stay silent as I had in years past. I used to believe I was my father's whole world. When I was little, he would take me to the park every Saturday afternoon, buy me strawberry ice cream, and sit on a bench listening to me chatter endlessly. I could still remember the warmth of his hand gripping mine as we crossed the street, the sound of his laughter when I fell off my bike for the first time but shouted, "I'm fine anyway." To me, those moments defined love. But it all ended the summer I turned 11, when he brought home a woman named Evelyn and 2 children he called his new family. Evelyn was 39, divorced, a literature teacher who dressed as if she were about to give an award speech. Her son Julian was my age, and her daughter Camila, 3 years younger, was often compared to a living porcelain doll. I vividly remember the first dinner they had in our house that had only ever been just the 2 of us. Evelyn sat in my mother's old chair, using the hand-embroidered napkins my mother had left behind. I didn't say a word. I just watched, feeling something quiet within me shift, like a door silently closing. At first, I tried to fit in. I forced a smile when Evelyn called me Little Ashley, even though her voice sent shivers down my spine. I played with Camila, despite her constant whining, and I attempted to find common ground with Julian, though he only spoke to me when he needed help with homework. But within months, I realized everything had changed, and not for the better. My father started forgetting our one-on-one traditions. Instead, he was always busy with their family outings, Camila's theater performances, Julian's sports tournaments. And me? I was at home, cleaning, babysitting, studying, and learning how to nod politely when Evelyn said, "You're the big sister. You should set an example." I became an unpaid housemaid in my own home. "Ashley, Camila spilled her milk. Clean it up. Ashley, tuck Camila into bed for me. Ashley, don't forget to take out the trash after doing the dishes." Even when it wasn't my fault, I was always the one responsible, and whenever I protested, Evelyn would smile sweetly and say, "Don't make a big deal out of small things." And my father? He would just shake his head, signaling me to stay quiet. I still remember a chilly March afternoon when I was 14. I waited outside school for almost an hour, my hands numb from the lingering Minnesota winter. When I finally got home, mud on my shoes, I found my father in the living room, laughing with Evelyn, Julian, and Camila, unwrapping early birthday presents for Camila. No one had remembered me. No one asked why I was late. But the final blow came when I was 17, preparing my college applications. Before she passed, my mother, a meticulous, loving woman, had set up a savings account just for me. She had scraped together every penny for nearly a decade as an accountant, her only wish being for me to have an education and a future of my own. One autumn morning, I checked the account, expecting to find enough for my first 2 years at Northwestern University, my dream school. Instead, the balance showed just 3 numbers, $128. I thought it was a mistake. I called the bank. And then my heart stopped when the teller confirmed that my father had withdrawn every cent 3 months ago for his son's tuition. His son wasn't me, it was Julian. I went home, the bank statement still clenched in my hands. I handed it to my father and asked, "Why?" He spoke as if he were discussing groceries. "Julian got into Michigan State. He needed the money immediately. You're smart. You can get scholarships." I wanted to scream that it was my mother's money, that it was her last gift to me, but I only managed to whisper, "Do you think Mom would have agreed?" He looked at me, said nothing. Then he turned away. That night, I packed my things. Just a few sets of clothes, my journal, and an old photo of my mother and me on my 8th birthday. I left that house in silence. No one saw me off. No one asked why. And no one tried to stop me. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I made a vow to myself. I would never return. At least not as the disappointment they had labeled me. Because in that moment, I knew I had only one choice left: to become the person my mother had always believed I could be. I left home on a crisp October morning, the air just beginning to bite with the arrival of fall. Each breath I exhaled turned into a misty white cloud before me, but inside I burned. not with anger but with the certainty that there was no turning back. The only luggage I carried was an old suitcase my mother had used in her college days, along with a few books, a sweater, and what little savings I had from my part-time job at the local bakery. No one saw me off, no hugs, no words of encouragement. As the door closed behind me, I heard laughter from inside, Evelyn and Camila rewatching Julian's birthday video. Meanwhile, I walked away in silence, as if I had never belonged there. I started my new life in Grand Rapids, nearly a 4-hour drive from home. It wasn't a big city, but it was big enough for me to disappear from my father's sight, and from his perfect family. I rented a small basement room from an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins, who let me pay rent in weekly installments. During the day, I worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic. At night, I washed dishes at a small Italian restaurant down the street. After 10 p.m., I took online courses, transfer credits to apply to the local public university. I didn't have time to feel sad. I didn't have the energy to dwell on the past. Each day was a cycle of tasks to complete, bills to pay, and long nights spent typing essays under dim yellow light. Meanwhile, Julian, the chosen son, posted pictures of pool parties in his dorm, vacations in Mexico, and brand new sneakers sponsored by Dad. Camila started a vlog titled Life Updates, documenting her new life in a penthouse apartment in Los Angeles. An apartment Vivelin had rented for her while she searched for inspiration to pursue art. I didn't follow them, but whenever their posts appeared on my feed by chance, I simply smirked. Not out of jealousy, but because I knew. If I waited for justice, I'd grow old and die in disappointment. So instead of waiting, I chose to act. 2 years later, I was accepted into Western Michigan University with a partial scholarship, thanks to my GPA and an essay titled, "Where do you find strength when there's nothing left to lose?" I wrote that essay in one night, tears soaking my keyboard. But I had never felt stronger. I kept working. By my second year, I started freelancing as a web designer for small businesses. At first, I built basic websites, but over time, I built a solid client network, especially after a regional coffee shop chain adopted my design for all their stores. I didn't stop working. By my final year, I was not only able to cover my tuition, but I had also saved enough to rent my own small apartment. No longer in a basement, no longer falling asleep beside rattling water pipes. I even launched my own website, where clients could book services and browse my portfolio. On the day of my graduation, I stood among hundreds of students, sunlight warming my black gown and cap. Around me, people cheered, hugged, threw flowers, and posed for endless photos. Meanwhile, I stood quietly, smiling, and wrapped my arms around myself. No one from my family came. No one asked what I had majored in. No one congratulated me. But I didn't need them. I had myself, the only person who would never abandon me. After the ceremony, I walked home alone, bought myself a small cake and a smoothie. I lit a candle, took a picture, and wrote in my journal, "I did it." Without anyone. For the longest time, I thought they had forgotten me. After all, I had cut off contact. But I was wrong. Every year, on special occasions like Thanksgiving or Christmas, I still received formal party invitations from Evelyn, printed on fine stationery, with sweetly worded messages like, "We hope you'll come home and reunite with your family." I never replied. But I kept the letters, not to read, but to remind myself. They only remembered me when they needed me to complete their perfect family picture. I kept building my career. At 24, I started a small digital design firm called Lighthouse Studio, named after what my mother used to call me, my little light. I hired 2 employees and expanded my clientele to neighboring areas. And Julian? One day I came across an article he'd been fired from his first job after just 6 months. Camila? She shut down her vlog after a flood of negative comments, accusing her of wasting money without producing real art. As for me, every morning I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, reviewed new contracts, and reminded myself, I don't live to prove anything to them. I live to keep my promise to myself. To never go back to where I started. I once believed that if I became successful enough, if I proved myself, they would look at me differently. But I was wrong. So many times. Even though I had been gone for nearly 6 years, I occasionally showed up at major family gatherings, mainly due to pressure from my mother's side of the family. They still believed in family above all, not knowing or refusing to acknowledge that this so-called family had left me alone in the freezing cold without a second thought. But I didn't blame them. They only knew what Evelyn told them, that I was the rebellious child who isolated herself to pursue some vague digital art dream. On Christmas Eve of my 25th year, I received a call from Aunt Carol, my late mother's younger sister. "Ashley, at least come to Christmas dinner. For me," she said, "it would make me happy if you came." I had 1,000 reasons to say no. But I owed her too much. From the times she secretly slipped me lunch money in high school, to her short but heartfelt holiday texts. I couldn't refuse. So I went. It was a bitterly cold night, snow covering the path leading to my father's mansion. The house was lit up like always, strings of colored lights glowing, a massive Christmas tree nearly reaching the ceiling, decked out in golden baubles and red ribbons. I stepped inside, and almost instantly the cold outside was replaced by another kind of chill, the one in Evelyn's gaze. "Oh, Ashley, you made it," she said, her voice laced with mock surprise. "It's good to see you finally remembered your way home." I didn't respond, just nodded at a few familiar relatives. Aunt Carol rushed over and hugged me, her warm smile the only thing keeping me from regretting my decision. The dining room was meticulously arranged, a long table draped in red velvet, candlelight flickering against crystal glasses, and a perfectly curated spread of traditional holiday dishes. Julian sat at the head of the table, boasting about his recent company-sponsored business trip to San Francisco. Camilla flaunted her new art collection, currently exhibited at a modern gallery in Santa Monica, a connection Evelyn helped arrange. My father sat in the center, looking like the ruler of a small kingdom. When I stepped into the dining room, he glanced up for a brief moment, then turned away, as if I were nothing more than a passing breeze. Dinner passed in the suffocating atmosphere I had long grown accustomed to. I ate in silence, ignoring the pretentious conversations. But I knew it was only a matter of time before they turned their attention to me. And right on cue, after dessert was served, my father set down his glass and turned to me, his deep voice cutting through the chatter. "You're still doing that little design thing, right?" I looked up, meeting his scrutinizing gaze. Every eye at the table was on me, waiting for my response. Or rather, waiting to see me fumble. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I still run my digital design firm. This year, I signed a contract with a nationwide hotel chain." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Evelyn let out a soft chuckle, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Sounds impressive. Strange, though. I don't recall seeing your name in the papers." Julian laughed loudly, adding, "Or is it still just designing websites for that little bakery down the street?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My father crossed his arms, took a slow sip of his drink, and said, "You're smart. I won't deny that. But if you had listened sooner, joined me at the company, you'd have a real position by now. The way you do business, it's too unstable." I looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time in years. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't concern or worry, no matter how much he tried to make it seem that way. It was fear. Fear that I could succeed without him. Fear that I would prove him wrong. I smiled, soft but unwavering. I don't need a position handed to me. I build my own." The table fell silent. Not because I had spoken loudly, but because no one had expected me to respond like that. This wasn't the same Ashley who used to know her place. This wasn't the child who sat quietly in the corner, trying not to draw attention. I wasn't seeking approval anymore. I was simply telling the truth. That night, as everyone cleaned up and the children gathered around the tree to open presents, I left that house in silence, just as I had when I was 18. But this time, it wasn't because I was being pushed out. It was because I had chosen not to belong there anymore. And the most surprising part? When I stepped outside, I didn't feel as cold as I had when I arrived. Maybe because I knew that the next time someone asked, "Why don't you come home?" I would smile and answer, "I have a home of my own." I was still standing there, right by the reception desk at my father's 60th birthday party, staring at the name tag. Ashley. The disappointment of the family? The chandelier above cast shimmering light onto the marble floor, but all I felt was a deep, lingering chill. Laughter rang through the air, glasses clinked, and soft jazz melodies floated from the live band in the corner. Everything was staged perfectly, a flawless tableau of a model family. A meticulously crafted picture, except for me. The ink stain that had been crossed out, yet still bled through. I could leave. I had left before. But this time I didn't want to retreat in silence. I was no longer the Ashley who endured quietly, who bit her tongue and pretended not to hear the jabs. Not tonight. I stepped into the grand hall where my father, Walter Simmons, stood at the center of his circle of guests. Dressed in a gray suit, silk tie, holding his wine glass as if he were delivering a presidential speech. Evelyn stood close by, her hand lightly touching his arm whenever he said something that made the guests laugh. I walked straight to the bar and took a glass of water. I didn't need alcohol to make me strong. As I turned back, my eyes met Camilla's. She stood with a group of people, probably social media influencers. Her expression wavered between curiosity and disdain. Then Julian noticed me too, exchanging a pointed glance with his mother. I lifted my glass and tapped it lightly. A soft ting rang out, not loud, but enough to turn a few heads. I stepped forward, right into the center of the room where all the lights converged. I took a deep breath. "Sorry to interrupt the celebration," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, just enough to make the surrounding chatter die down. My father's eyes widened for a brief second before he raised an eyebrow, about to say something, but I continued before he could. Tonight is my father's 60th birthday, a milestone, a life of success, power, and remarkable talent in deciding who is worthy to be called his child. The air thickened. A few whispers spread through the crowd. Evelyn straightened her posture, pressing her lips together. "Some of you may not know," I went on. "I'm Ashley, the only daughter of Walter Simmons. But judging by how he treats me, you'd think I was just another stranger at this party." I lifted my chin, locking eyes with him. "Your daughter, the one erased from family photos. The one you never showed up for at a single graduation. The one you scoffed at whenever my career was mentioned because it didn't align with what you wanted." No one spoke. I could hear my own heartbeat, but my voice remained steady. Tonight, someone left me a gift. A name tag labeled, "The Disappointment of the Family." How thoughtful, how creative. But if you thought that would make me bow my head, then you forgot one thing. I have learned to stand tall. Without any of you holding me up. I turned to Evelyn, my voice lower, colder. "Evelyn, you've spent over a decade trying to erase me. From dinner tables, from photo frames, from college funds, from my father's trust. But you forgot one thing. I'm still here. I exist. And I am not afraid of you anymore." Evelyn's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. I shifted my gaze to Julian and Camila. "Julian, Camila, you had everything. Favoritism, money, opportunities I could only dream of. But I wonder, without my father's backing, how far would either of you really go?" I placed my glass on the table beside me. Gently, firmly. "Dad," I said, calling him that for the first time in years. For so long, I only wanted one thing. To be seen as myself. Not as a replica of someone else. Not as a mold you created. But I understand now. That will never happen. I smiled, a light, razor-sharp smile. And I also understand I don't need that to keep moving forward. I took a step back, turning away, my gaze sweeping over the entire room. The stunned faces, the uneasy whispers, the discomfort in their eyes. "I hope you all enjoy the rest of the party," I said, louder this time. "Because this will be the last time you see me." No one stopped me. No one dared. I left the room, the door closing softly behind me. Cold, but not as cold as the years I had spent being forgotten. I stepped outside, tilting my head up. The Chicago night wind howled, but I had never felt more at ease. Freedom had never been clearer. The doors to the banquet hall shut behind me in a strange silence, as if the world inside had been severed entirely. I walked down the long hallway, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Cold, final, no more music, no more dazzling chandeliers, no more scrutinizing gazes clinging to me like they had for years. There was only me, and the sweet quiet of freedom. I got into my car, sitting in the driver's seat without starting the engine. The streetlights cast a faint glow onto the windshield, reflecting my face in the rearview mirror. Not the girl who once longed for her father to turn back. Not the girl who wished Evelyn would change. Not the girl who hoped Julian or Camila would treat her like family. I looked into my own eyes and saw something I had never seen so clearly before. My phone vibrated. A message popped up from Evelyn. "Ashley, you embarrassed the entire family. That behavior was absolutely unacceptable." I didn't bother reading the rest. The next message came from Julian. "So childish, always playing the victim." Then Camila. "If your life is hard, that's your choice. Don't blame anyone else." I scrolled through them silently. No anger, no tears, just a quiet nod to myself. I did the right thing. Then the last message made me pause. The sender, "Dad, call me, we need to talk." I set my phone down on the seat beside me and started the car. The engine purred softly in the quiet night. I drove away from the hotel, following the riverbank where city lights shimmered over the rippling water. No destination in mind, just the need to get away, to let my mind breathe for once. By the time I arrived at my small apartment, the clock was nearing midnight. I locked the door, hung up my coat, and turned on the warm yellow light in the living room. The space was modest but tidy, carefully curated. Every piece of furniture, every bookshelf, every chair, every framed picture was something I had chosen for myself. A reflection of the life I had built with my own hands. My phone continued buzzing. Messages, missed calls, social media notifications, all from them. No apologies, no concern for how I was feeling. Just blame, outrage, and demands for me to come back and take responsibility for their humiliation. I opened my contacts, scrolling through the names one by one. Evelyn, blocked. Julian, blocked. Camilla, blocked. And finally, my father, blocked. Silence. Like shutting a door that should have been closed long ago. The next morning, I woke to birds chirping outside my window. No notifications, no messages dragging me back into an old reality. I brewed coffee, played soft jazz, and opened my laptop to start work as usual. But I knew everything was different now. Mid-morning, an unfamiliar number appeared on my screen. I hesitated for a few seconds, then answered. A familiar voice spoke, calm but with a clear effort to restrain itself. "Ashley, it's your father." I exhaled slowly, closing my eyes for a moment. "I know. Not even one call? Not even a word?" I said nothing. Then, slowly, I replied, "What do you want to say?" A heavy sigh came through the phone. "You went too far last night. No matter how upset you were, you shouldn't have made a scene in front of everyone. People are talking. My reputation—" "Your reputation?" I cut him off. My voice wasn't raised, but it was firm. "You never cared about my dignity all these years. But now you're worried about yours? When did you become so bitter, Ashley? Maybe the day you forgot I existed as part of this family." Silence. I continued. letting the words spill out like stones finally lifted from my chest. You're only calling because you want control. Because you're afraid people will find out your daughter doesn't fit into the perfect family you've created. But you know what? I spent years in silence, in pitiful glances, in the constant feeling of being pushed aside, and now I choose a different kind of silence, the kind where none of you have a place in my life anymore. I ended the call. She didn't wait for him to respond. 1 second later, I blocked his number. No goodbyes, no regrets, no looking back. I stood up, threw open the window, and let the crisp morning air rush in. The scent of coffee still lingered in the air, and my chest felt lighter than it had in years. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that from that moment on, I was finally living, not as a shadow in someone else's story, but as the main character in my own. A week after that fateful birthday party, I sat in my favorite cafe near the office, hands wrapped around a warm latte. The past few days had passed in a quiet, liberating calm. No more flashing notifications. No more Evelyn's voice echoing in my mind whenever I tried to rest. No more guilt-driven thoughts telling me to call home just to prove I wasn't ungrateful. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not the kind of lightness that comes from running away, but the kind that comes from finally loosening an invisible rope that had been strangling me for half my life. I felt no guilt. Not even a little. If anything, I felt like I had finally stopped pretending. I used to believe I needed their approval. I thought if I tried a little harder, if I was a little kinder, if I was a little better, maybe my father would look at me the way he looked at Julian. Maybe Evelyn would stop mocking me. Maybe Camila would stop treating me like I was beneath her. But after years of being pushed aside, I understood the truth. Validation from people who never intended to give it was nothing more than an illusion. No matter how hard I tried, I would never be enough for them. One Sunday morning, sunlight streamed through my white curtains as I stood in my living room, small but warm, and asked myself, if today were the first day I could truly live for myself, what would I do? I put on a classical playlist, opened my planner, and wrote the first words in blue ink. Live for myself, not for anyone else's expectations. I started making time for things I had once put aside, the paintings I never finished, the books I left halfway through, the cafes I always wanted to visit but skipped because I was too busy proving my worth. I re-uploaded a few personal design projects on my company's website, not client work, just things I created simply because they made me feel alive. And to my surprise, a week later, a boutique furniture brand from Portland reached out, asking if I would collaborate on their fall campaign. We want something with soul, and we see that in your designs. I read that sentence over and over. No talk of fitting industry standards, no demands to match market trends. Just an honest recognition of my work, from people who had no idea who my father was, who valued me for what I created, not for where I came from. That feeling of being seen for my own talent, not for my place in a family, was what I had been searching for all along. One afternoon, I sat in the park with Aunt Carol, her hand gently holding mine. You know, Ashley, she said softly, since your mother passed, I always worried you'd be swallowed up by the coldness of that household. But today, looking at you, I'm so proud. I squeezed her hand. I didn't need anyone else. I just needed one person who truly saw me, and that was enough. Freedom, I realized, wasn't just about leaving a house, a party, or a phone call. True freedom was letting go of the need to be accepted in order to exist. I no longer needed my father's approval to believe in my own worth. I didn't need Evelyn's fake smiles to feel loved. I didn't need Julian or Camila to stop flaunting their privilege for me to know I wasn't lesser. All I needed was me, the person who had survived it all, who stood strong, and who had never let her heart grow cold. There were days when I still thought about the past, but not with bitterness, just as a part of the journey. Every wound had taught me something. Every act of neglect had taught me to remember myself, And every time I was pushed away, I had been brought closer to the truth. Not everyone who carries the title of family truly brings you love. It was a lesson I'd paid for with my youth. But I knew there was nothing more valuable than the freedom to walk forward, unburdened, never again needing permission to be myself. Because now I was no longer the disappointment of the family. I was my own greatest pride. From my own story, I've realized no one has the right to define your worth except for you. Family isn't always a safe place if it forces you to forget who you are. True freedom isn't found in acceptance. It's found in having the courage to walk away from relationships that hurt you. I no longer live to please others. Now I live to honor myself, the person who endured it all and never looked back. What do you think about Ashley's journey? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between family expectations and your own happiness? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, resilience, and self-discovery.